When we observe the British royal family today, we are seduced by a flawless illusion of antiquity. We see the gilded carriages, the measured waves, and a legacy that appears to have grown organically from the soil of Britain over millennia. They sit at the absolute zenith of the world's most enduring institutions. However, strip away the velvet and the pageantry, and you will find that the House of Windsor is not a divine institution. It is arguably the most successful public relations corporation in human history. Their survival for over a century relies not on absolute power, but on strategic marriages, ruthless media manipulation, and a terrifying ability to rewrite their own reality. The name Windsor itself is the ultimate proof. It is not a name born of heritage, it is a fabricated brand identity, forged in sheer panic to mask a bloodline that was rapidly becoming a political liability. To deconstruct this dynasty, we must return to the blood-soaked summer of 1917. The skies above London were violently torn apart by German heavy bombers known as the Gothas. Night after night, these monstrous machines crossed the English Channel, raining fire and devastation upon British cities. The word Gotha became universally synonymous with death, terror, and a deep, visceral hatred for the German Empire. Yet, amidst this national trauma, a highly toxic irony resided inside Buckingham Palace. The British royal family did not have a British name. They were the House of Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha. Imagine the catastrophic PR nightmare. The nation is locked in a brutal, total war with Germany. Innocent citizens are being slaughtered by German Gotha bombers, and the king, sitting on the British throne, shares the exact same name as the weapons destroying his cities. King George V possessed the sharp political survival instincts of a cornered animal. Just months prior, he had watched in horror as his cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, was overthrown. The horrific fate of the Romanovs served as a chilling warning. The era of untouchable monarchies was dead. If the public turned on you, the crown could be crushed in a matter of days. Facing this existential threat, George V executed a masterclass in historical erasure. On the 17th of July, 1917, via a royal proclamation, he unilaterally severed centuries of his family's deep-rooted German heritage. With a stroke of a pen, he mandated a massive corporate rebranding, adopting the name Windsor, a title borrowed from the ancient Berkshire castle. It sounded profoundly, reassuringly English. It was a complete fabrication. Across the trenches, the German Emperor Wilhelm II, another of George's cousins, mocked the charade, famously joking that he was eager to see a theatrical production of The Merry Wives of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The enemies of the crown saw right through the disguise. But the terrifying part is, it worked flawlessly. The British public consumed the new identity. The success of 1917 taught the family their most critical survival tactic. History is malleable. You can erase the past and invent a new truth, provided you do it with absolute, unwavering confidence. However, this carefully constructed brand was almost destroyed from the inside 2 decades later. If George V was the founder of the Windsor PR machine, his son, King Edward VIII, was the rogue CEO who almost bankrupted it. Having been on the throne for less than a year in 1936, Edward decided to detonate a constitutional crisis for the love of a woman. Wallis Simpson was not merely unsuitable. To the establishment, she was a radioactive liability. She was a loud American socialite, and crucially, a 2-time divorcee. In the deeply conservative 1930s, this was scandalous. Furthermore, the Church of England, which the king theoretically led, strictly forbade the remarriage of divorced individuals whose former spouses were still alive. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin presented a cold, uncompromising ultimatum. Edward could retain the crown, or he could marry Wallis. He could not have both. Unlike the rigid, sycophantic courtiers who bored him, Wallis treated Edward like a mortal man. She challenged him, mocked him, and offered an intoxicating escape from the suffocating prison of royal protocol. After a lifetime of being managed, Edward chose to rebel. On the 10th of December, 1936, Edward VIII abdicated, becoming the first and only British monarch to voluntarily abandon the throne. In a famous radio broadcast, he framed his departure as a tragic romance, claiming he could not carry the burden of kingship without the woman he loved. The British press and public violently turned on Wallis, branding her an ambitious witch who had maliciously seduced their naive prince. But the romanticized narrative of the king who gave up his throne for love was a convenient smokescreen. The British establishment was secretly relieved to be rid of him. The deeply buried truth, the reality the Windsors fought desperately to suppress, was that Edward and Wallis were active Nazi sympathizers. In 1937, the exiled couple visited Adolf Hitler, with Edward proudly offering Nazi salutes for the cameras. Post-war intelligence revealed that the Third Reich had concrete plans to reinstall Edward as a fascist puppet king if Germany successfully invaded Britain. The family that had changed its name to escape its German roots now harbored a former king flirting with the German Nazi regime. To protect the Windsor brand, the royal machinery went into overdrive. They permanently exiled Edward to political irrelevance, shifted the line of succession to his younger brother, King George VI, and aggressively buried the Nazi connection. Out of this manufactured crisis, Queen Elizabeth II's path to the throne was secured. The dynasty survived by doing what it does best, excising the diseased tissue, manipulating the narrative, and presenting a flawless, stoic face to a world that desperately wanted to believe in the illusion. For over half a century, the public relations machinery of the Windsor Corporation operated with terrifying efficiency. They meticulously constructed and fiercely guarded an illusion of moral superiority, stoic duty, and flawless dignity. However, even the most exquisitely crafted facade cannot permanently conceal the structural rot festering within. The definitive unraveling of this grand illusion commenced in 1992, a period so utterly catastrophic that Queen Elizabeth II publicly branded it her annus horribilis, translating to a horrible year. She was not engaging in hyperbole. It was the precise moment the dynasty's omnipotent crisis management system suffered a total, multi-front collapse. In March of that year, the British establishment was rocked when Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, legally separated from his wife, Sarah Ferguson. The ruthless tabloid press gleefully published extremely compromising photographs of Sarah vacationing with her financial advisor, capturing intimate moments by a swimming pool. For an institution that valued optics above human life, this highly publicized humiliation was a devastating blow. The very next month, Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, finalized her divorce from Captain Mark Phillips. They had been leading separate lives for years, and Anne had already aligned herself with a naval officer. To circumvent the strict anti-remarriage laws of the Church of England, she was forced to marry in a small, quietly arranged Scottish ceremony. The Queen's carefully curated image of the idyllic, unbroken Christian family was disintegrating piece by piece before an audience of millions. Yet, the relentless assault of 1992 extended far beyond scandalous divorce settlements. In November, a literal inferno threatened to consume the very heart of the empire when Windsor Castle caught fire. Ignited by a faulty spotlight illuminating a curtain in the Queen's private chapel, the merciless blaze raged out of control for 15 hours. 250 firefighters waged a desperate battle against the flames. By the time the ashes cooled, 115 rooms had been heavily damaged or entirely destroyed. The estimated cost of restoration was a staggering £60 million, projected to take 5 long years to complete. This physical disaster immediately triggered an unprecedented public relations crisis. The castle, inexplicably, was not insured. A furious, nationwide debate ignited over who should foot the astronomical bill. While some traditionalists argued the state should pay to preserve national heritage, millions of outraged taxpayers demanded that the Queen, one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet, pay for the damages herself. Ultimately, the monarch was forced into a humiliating retreat, agreeing to a historic compromise. Buckingham Palace opened its doors to paying tourists for the very first time to fund the restoration. The fire was highly symbolic. It was the physical manifestation of the Windsor privilege burning to the ground. However, the most destructive explosive planted beneath the throne lay within the marriage of the heir apparent. The 1981 wedding between Prince Charles and Diana Spencer, consumed by 750 million global viewers, was flawlessly marketed by the palace spin doctors as a modern fairy tale. In reality, it was a ruthless, high-stakes corporate acquisition. Charles, at 32 years old, was buckling under immense pressure from the board of directors, primarily his father, Prince Philip, to secure the royal succession. Charles had been deeply in love with Camilla Parker Bowles since the early 1970s. Camilla was grounded, witty, and treated him as an equal rather than a deity. But to the firm, Camilla was an entirely unacceptable asset. She lacked the requisite aristocratic pedigree, and crucially, she was not a virgin. Consequently, Charles was forced to acquire a more suitable commodity. 19-year-old Diana Spencer was the perfect raw material. Aristocratically bred, photographically stunning, completely inexperienced, and seemingly malleable. Upon entering the palace, Diana's existence transformed into a gilded, heavily monitored prison. Her contractual obligations were clear: produce healthy heirs, smile radiantly for the cameras, and above all else, remain absolutely silent. She fulfilled the primary directive by giving birth to Prince William and Prince Harry. But demanding her silence proved to be a fatal miscalculation. While Charles resumed his affair with Camilla, Diana was left completely isolated, battling severe, untreated psychological trauma. To survive the suffocating isolation, the asset became self-aware. Diana weaponized her immense global popularity, subverting the royal playbook entirely. She aggressively pursued charitable causes the firm deemed too messy. She famously walked through active minefields to campaign against landmines, and she physically embraced patients dying of HIV/AIDS during the height of global stigma. She offered the public raw, genuine empathy, drawing a devastating contrast with the cold, robotic detachment of her in-laws. She became the people's princess, amassing a soft power that terrified the establishment. In 1992, the meticulously crafted corporate illusion was permanently shattered. Journalist Andrew Morton published a groundbreaking biography exposing the dark, toxic reality of the royal marriage. The book detailed Charles's adultery and Diana's desperate struggles. The most terrifying aspect for the palace was the undeniable accuracy of the details. It was later confirmed that Diana herself was the primary source, secretly recording tapes to smuggle out of the palace. For the first time in modern history, a royal asset had bypassed the corporate PR machine to leak the truth directly to the consumers. The dam had broken. Shortly after, Intercepted private telephone conversations were leaked to the merciless tabloid press. The public was treated to intimate, deeply embarrassing recordings between Diana and a close friend, followed by an agonizingly inappropriate, highly explicit phone call between Charles and Camilla. The untouchable aura of the future king was reduced to vulgar tabloid fodder. The dignity of the monarchy had evaporated. The Windsor Corporation had entirely lost its monopoly on the truth, plunging the institution into the darkest era of its modern existence. The year 1992 may have severely fractured the structural integrity of Buckingham Palace, but the true war for the control of the narrative was only just beginning. The Windsor Corporation operated under the arrogant assumption that orchestrating a formal separation between Prince Charles and Princess Diana would be a sufficient firewall to contain the ensuing scandal. They critically underestimated the woman they had originally acquired to be a silent, compliant asset. Diana, after enduring over a decade within the suffocating, frigid protocols of the royal machine, had masterfully learned to wield the very weapon the establishment used to maintain its supremacy, the camera lens. She inherently understood the golden rule of modern public relations. Whoever tells their truth first and connects most deeply with the audience's emotions controls the absolute reality. In November 1995, a public relations nuclear bomb was dropped directly onto the British establishment. Diana orchestrated an explosive, deeply clandestine interview with journalist Martin Bashir on the BBC's Panorama programme. There was no royal authorization. There were no sanitized scripts drafted by palace communications experts. In an act of unparalleled corporate sabotage, Diana bypassed the entire royal intelligence apparatus to speak directly to 23 million British television viewers. In that defining moment, she actively refused to play the role of the stoic, emotionally detached royal. She presented herself as a profoundly wounded, isolated, yet utterly fearless woman. With a voice that was soft, yet razor-sharp, Diana systematically dismantled the Windsor illusion. She openly discussed her brutal battles with severe postpartum depression, bulimia, the agonizing feeling of institutional abandonment, and the profound cruelty of a system that viewed her solely as a breeding vessel. Then, she delivered the devastating soundbite that would permanently define the decade and cement Charles's betrayal in the annals of history. She calmly stated that there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. The entire nation held its breath. Buckingham Palace was completely blindsided. The firm had permanently lost its absolute monopoly on the truth. Diana had executed an untouchable maneuver, violently stripping the monarchy of its sacred moral high ground in front of a global audience. Queen Elizabeth II, the ultimate CEO of the Windsor brand, realized this rogue asset had to be neutralized immediately. The corporation could no longer tolerate a rebellious element that threatened the very survival of the monarchy. Exhibiting her trademark cold pragmatism, the Queen dispatched forceful directives to both Charles and Diana, commanding them to finalize an immediate legal divorce. In August 1996, the most disastrous corporate merger of the 20th century was officially dissolved. Diana secured a settlement of approximately £17 million and retained her apartments at Kensington Palace, but the firm exacted a petty, vindictive revenge. They permanently stripped her of the title, Her Royal Highness. The Windsor Corporation reclaimed its trademark. From that moment forward, she was merely Diana, Princess of Wales. She had finally won her freedom, but the cost was terrifying. Stripped of the official royal security apparatus, she was thrown unprotected to the ravenous wolves of the tabloid media industry. The summer of 1997 should have represented a radiant new chapter for a woman who had endured profound institutional abuse. Diana began a high-profile romance with Dodi Fayed, the charismatic son of the powerful Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed. Dodi offered her sweeping romance, luxurious escapes on Mediterranean superyachts, and the intoxicating feeling of being genuinely desired after years of emotional starvation. However, to the predatory paparazzi industry, this romance was not a human connection. It was an incredibly lucrative commodity. Within this ruthless media ecosystem, an exclusive photograph of Diana was worth a literal fortune, commanding hundreds of thousands of dollars. The paparazzi had evolved from mere photographers into a ruthless, highly aggressive mercenary force. They stalked her relentlessly, utilizing high-speed motorcycles to block her path, screaming vile insults to intentionally provoke her. They knew that a photograph capturing the tears of the people's princess would generate the highest possible financial return. Diana's profound psychological distress fueled a multi-million-dollar tabloid economy. The dark culmination of this relentless hunt occurred in Paris on the night of the 30th of August, 1997. Attempting to escape the suffocating siege of camera lenses, Diana and Dodi exited the Ritz Hotel through a rear door, entering a Mercedes driven by the acting head of security, Henri Paul. They were completely unaware that the driver was significantly impaired by alcohol, and the photographers were already lying in wait like vultures. A terrifying, high-speed pursuit ensued through the Parisian night. The vehicle careened wildly into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. At 12:23 a.m. on August 31, the Mercedes lost control, violently slamming into a concrete pillar. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were killed upon impact. Diana suffered catastrophic internal injuries, but remained conscious in the immediate aftermath. It was here that one of the most chilling, inhuman displays of modern media obsession took place. Instead of attempting to render life-saving aid to the dying woman trapped in the mangled wreckage, the pursuing photographers chose to continuously fire their cameras. The relentless, blinding flashes illuminated the agonizing final moments of a global icon. At 4 a.m., in a Parisian hospital, the Princess of Wales was pronounced dead at the age of 36. Her death sent a seismic shockwave through the British psyche, completely shattering the nation's traditional emotional restraint. Millions flooded the streets in uncontrollable grief. An absolute ocean of flowers besieged the gates of Kensington Palace. This unprecedented public mourning rapidly metastasized into blind fury, directed at the royal family, who disastrously chose to remain in cold, silent seclusion at Balmoral Castle. Her funeral was a global spectacle watched by billions. Inside Westminster Abbey, her brother, Earl Charles Spencer, delivered a devastating eulogy that served as a final, lethal strike against the Windsor Corporation. He openly branded Diana as the most hunted person of the modern age, directing his palpable rage squarely at the royal establishment and the complicit press. The shocking, thunderous applause that echoed through the sacred abbey sounded like a guilty verdict. The narrative had completely escaped the firm's control. The sheer senselessness of her death birthed endless conspiracy theories, as the public simply refused to accept that such a monumental force could be extinguished by a drunk driver and a horde of greedy photographers. The Windsor Corporation ultimately survived the storm, but its public image was permanently disfigured by the tragic blood of the Princess of Wales. Entering the 21st century, the Windsor Corporation operated under the delusion that it had successfully modernized. They believed the catastrophic PR failures surrounding Princess Diana's death had taught them how to navigate the modern media landscape. They projected an image of a more accessible, empathetic institution. However, the fundamental operational DNA of the firm, built entirely upon secrecy, absolute privilege, and the illusion of unaccountability, remained utterly unchanged. The next existential threat to the Buckingham Palace boardroom did not arrive in the form of a rebellious outsider. It was incubated internally, born from the deeply ingrained aristocratic arrogance that a royal is inherently immune to consequences. This manifested in the spectacular, grotesque downfall of Prince Andrew. For decades, Andrew functioned within the firm as the Playboy Prince, a moniker heavily circulated by the tabloid press. Shielded by his military record in the Falklands War, he enjoyed an existence completely detached from reality, characterized by lavish parties and highly questionable associations. In the corporate world, maintaining intimate friendships with individuals embroiled in severe legal controversies is grounds for immediate termination. But within the isolated, gilded bubble of the royal establishment, Andrew operated under the arrogant assumption that his bloodline granted him absolute immunity. In November 2019, attempting to execute a solo crisis management maneuver, Andrew agreed to a highly publicised interview on the BBC's Newsnight programme with journalist Emily Maitlis. He walked into the studio projecting the supreme overconfidence of a man who had never faced a genuine consequence in his life. The resulting broadcast was not a successful vindication. It was the most catastrophic public relations suicide in the modern history of the monarchy. Before an audience of millions, Andrew delivered bizarre, highly contradictory explanations and exhibited a chilling, absolute lack of empathy for any victims involved. He exposed himself as a monumentally entitled executive, completely detached from basic human decency. The global backlash was instantaneous and merciless. In the era of social media, the Windsor PR machine could no longer suppress the narrative through back-channel intimidation. Within days, corporate sponsors, elite institutions, and charities aggressively severed their ties with the toxic prince. Queen Elizabeth II, acting not as a mother but as the ruthless chief executive of the firm, was forced to execute a brutal corporate restructuring. She decisively stripped her own son of his military titles, royal patronages, and public duties. Andrew was forcibly retired, permanently exiled to the sprawling grounds of Royal Lodge. He was reduced to a radioactive liability, hidden away in the corporate basement. The firm had demonstrated its ultimate loyalty. No single employee, regardless of their proximity to the CEO, is allowed to jeopardize the survival of the master brand. Yet, the liquidation of Prince Andrew was merely a prelude to a far more devastating structural fracture. The historic defection of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, globally branded as Megxit. Harry had always occupied a deeply traumatic position within the corporate hierarchy. He was explicitly designated as the spare, a biological insurance policy for the designated heir, Prince William. Throughout his life, Harry carried the profound, untreated psychological scars of watching the firm's unholy alliance with the paparazzi mentally destroy and ultimately kill his mother. When Harry acquired Meghan Markle, a mixed-race American actress, the palace initially marketed the union as a triumphant rebranding. It was sold as proof of a modern, inclusive, and globally relevant monarchy. However, that PR honeymoon rapidly devolved into a coordinated, systemic assault. The British tabloid press, functioning as the unacknowledged enforcement arm of the royal establishment, immediately targeted Meghan with a vicious, unprecedented double standard laced with racial undertones. The juxtaposition was undeniable and highly weaponized. When Kate Middleton cradled her pregnant belly, the press lauded her maternal grace. When Meghan executed the exact same gesture, she was crucified for being a narcissistic attention seeker. When Kate ate avocados, it was a healthy lifestyle choice. When Meghan ate them, she was bizarrely accused of fueling human rights abuses and drought. This was not objective journalism. It was a targeted corporate hazing ritual designed to break a rising star who threatened to outshine the core executives. Harry watched history repeating itself with terrifying precision. He witnessed his pregnant wife being systematically hunted by the exact same media apparatus that had chased his mother into a concrete pillar in Paris. He pleaded with the firm's management for institutional protection, but his requests were met with cold, bureaucratic silence. The corporation's prime directive was clear: protect the heir and the Queen at all costs. The spare is expendable. The firm issued an ultimatum: submit to the abuse and remain silent, or lose everything. Harry chose defection. In an unprecedented move, the couple triggered their own exit clause, resigning as senior working royals, severing their financial reliance, and fleeing to California. It was a massive, humiliating rejection of the most coveted corporate identity on Earth. In March 2021, the defectors launched their counteroffensive. Sitting down with Oprah Winfrey before a global audience of over 80 million, the former senior royals became the ultimate corporate whistleblowers. They exposed the toxic, rotting core of the Windsor establishment. Meghan delivered devastating testimony, revealing she was explicitly denied psychiatric help while experiencing suicidal ideation because the HR department deemed it bad for the brand's optics. Even more explosively, Harry confirmed that senior, unnamed executives within the family had engaged in highly disturbing conversations regarding how dark their unborn son's skin might be. The allegations of institutional racism and severe psychological negligence ripped the progressive mask off the monarchy. Buckingham Palace's response was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. They released a brief, heavily sanitized statement, claiming that while the issues raised were concerning, recollections may vary. They refused to take accountability, retreating behind their ancient walls of stoicism and denial. The global audience fractured completely. Half the world viewed Harry and Meghan as courageous survivors dismantling a toxic empire, while traditionalists branded them as greedy, narcissistic traitors. Regardless of the polarization, the irrefutable truth remained. The Windsor Corporation was bleeding out. By ruthlessly discarding Prince Andrew for his indefensible arrogance, while simultaneously driving Prince Harry to a desperate escape to protect his family, the firm proved a terrifying reality. In its relentless, pathological obsession with preserving the crown, the British royal family had sacrificed the very last remnants of its humanity. In September 2022, the most formidable and successful chief executive officer the Windsor Corporation had ever known, Queen Elizabeth II, passed away at the age of 96. Her death did not merely signal the end of a historical epoch, it effectively shattered the strongest, most impenetrable armor the British royal family possessed. Throughout her staggering 7-decade reign, the Queen functioned as the ultimate corporate shield, an embodiment of stoic duty and absolute silence. She was the steadfast anchor that prevented the Windsor vessel from capsizing during the most violent media storms. But with that anchor permanently removed, the colossal machinery of power was unceremoniously handed over to an executive who had spent his entire adult life languishing in the waiting room, King Charles III. Charles endured the longest corporate apprenticeship in British history. At the age of 73, a time when most men have long settled into quiet retirement, he finally inherited the blood-soaked crown of his ancestors. His coronation, staged in May 2023, was a fascinating study in corporate cognitive dissonance. While Buckingham Palace public relations executives desperately attempted to market the event as a slimmed-down ceremony reflecting modern economic realities, the world was nevertheless subjected to an absurd display of extreme, archaic opulence. The sight of a solid gold carriage rolling through the streets of London, directly past overwhelmed food banks where millions of British citizens were battling a crippling cost of living crisis, created a bitterly ironic spectacle. The global British Empire had collapsed decades ago. The Commonwealth was merely a polite phantom of former conquests, yet the Windsor Corporation stubbornly clung to hyper-expensive pageantry to artificially inflate its perceived relevance. However, the most astonishing detail of the new era, and the ultimate testament to the terrifying efficacy of the royal public relations machine, was not the new king himself. It was the woman seated beside him, Queen Consort Camilla. Rewind the clock to the 1990s, and Camilla was universally reviled as the most hated woman in Britain. She was the ruthless corporate disruptor, the other woman, who systematically dismantled the fairy tale marriage of Princess Diana, generating the most catastrophic tabloid scandals of the century. Yet, incredibly, the crown was placed upon her head with full institutional blessing. Through terrifying patience, decades of meticulous PR rehabilitation campaigns, and the cold-blooded elimination of internal opposition, the Windsor firm successfully laundered its greatest scandal. Camilla's ascension to Queen is the ultimate proof that the British monarchy can rewrite any history and sanitize any sin, provided they deploy enough time and institutional power. Despite this monumental PR victory, the severe structural fractures running through the foundation of the institution cannot be hidden. The entire future of the royal brand now rests squarely upon the shoulders of Prince William and Princess Kate. They are the final viable flagship products remaining on the corporate shelf. Unlike his brother Harry, who triggered an emergency exit, William explicitly understands the brutal corporate mandate. He has fully accepted the role, converting his family into flawless, perpetually smiling brand ambassadors. But one must question, can a handful of photogenic executives single-handedly save a rapidly decaying corporate model? Every year, the British taxpayers are billed hundreds of millions of pounds to finance royal security, the maintenance of sprawling, opulent palaces, and the sovereign grant. In return, Buckingham Palace aggressively peddles the narrative that they provide vital national stability and generate massive tourism revenue. Yet, the tourism argument is increasingly exposed as a hollow corporate talking point. Countless nations across the globe, from France to Russia, successfully draw tens of millions of tourists to their magnificent historic palaces without the financial burden of financing a billionaire family to actually live inside them. The younger British generation, raised in an era of digital transparency and economic anxiety, is asking highly dangerous questions. They observe extraordinarily wealthy individuals occupying state-funded castles and demand to know the true democratic function of this institution. The reverence for inherited superiority is dying. The world has fundamentally transformed since King George V fabricated the Windsor name out of thin air in 1917. The monarchy's ultimate weapon, the absolute monopoly on information, has been entirely neutralized. The proliferation of social media and global digital connectivity means Buckingham Palace can no longer dictate the narrative. Every misstep, every flash of annoyance, every highly orchestrated photo opportunity is instantly captured, globally distributed, and ruthlessly dissected by millions in real time. The sacred veil of mystery that once protected the royals from mortal scrutiny has been permanently shredded. Stripped of their manufactured mystique, they are exposed simply as profoundly flawed individuals trapped in an incredibly expensive, obsolete reality show. Furthermore, the ghosts of the firm's brutal past refuse to rest. Prince Andrew remains in a state of permanent internal exile on the royal estate, a humiliating, living monument to the firm's toxic aristocratic arrogance. Prince Harry continues to launch devastating corporate leaks from across the Atlantic, relentlessly exposing the cold, bureaucratic cruelty operating behind closed doors. And the phantom of Diana, Princess of Wales, continues to cast a massive shadow over the entire institution, a constant global reminder of the fatal blood price a woman paid for daring to defy the corporate machine. The Windsor brand was originally born from sheer panic. It was a calculated, desperate media stunt executed by a king, terrified that his German bloodline would provoke a violent revolution. From its very inception, the modern identity of the royal family has been a carefully staged production. Perhaps that is the ultimate truth of the British monarchy. It is an exquisitely beautiful, astronomically expensive national fiction. Britain continues to fund the illusion primarily because the establishment is terrified of confronting the identity crisis that would follow its abolition. The ancient wealth of the crown has purchased absolute privilege, legal protection, and the most successful historical whitewashing campaigns in human history, but it has never been able to purchase truth, and it can no longer purchase silence. The ultimate collapse of the Windsor Corporation will not be a sudden, violent explosion. It will be a slow, agonizing erosion. With every new scandal, with every passing generation, the gilded paint aggressively peels away. They remain seated on the throne, waving obediently from the balcony, but the earth beneath their palace is steadily crumbling away with every beat of the modern world.